War and ISIS by Maddie, Ritz, and Gabby.
And just to clarify, ISIS isn't actually at war with any countries or anyone. War hasn't actually been declared by anyone. And
Who can declare war?
What?
Who can declare war?
Congress.
ISIS stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. In 2003, how did ISIS start? In 2003, U.S. troops began to invade Iraq because Saddam Hussein threatened the U.S. with weapons. The troops, and mass destruction too. The troops kicked the president Saddam Hussein out of office. Soon after this, many Iraqi citizens became unemployed because the president, since he had like a lot of soldiers because of all like the terrorism and stuff, then they didn't have basically a job anymore, so they were all unemployed, and they were mad about that. So they formed a revolt against the U.S. troops in Iraq. The Al-Qaeda, another terrorist group, who formed when the Soviet Union invaded in Afghanistan in the 80s, was weak at the time, so they formed an alliance with the Iraqis that were unemployed and formed the revolt. They called themselves Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI. The AQI's intentions were similar to ISIS's, which are to form an Islamic state. AQI made extremely harsh and radical laws. This act led to the loss of support from the Sunnis, a branch of Islam that is a minority in Iraq. The U.S. formed an alliance with the Sunnis, and together they took down the group. But it was still not completely defeated. There were still some people who had the same intentions, so they rebuilt themselves and became involved with the fighting in Syria at this time. There was a civil war in Syria at the time, and it was basically the people, the government against people who didn't like the government in Syria. Yeah, they were fighting. The group became so brutal that Al-Qaeda left them because they didn't want their evilness to be their face of their brand. After the split, the Iraqis named themselves ISIS. Their current leader of ISIS is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
Can you say that name one more time?
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
Say it 3 times fast.
What does ISIS want? Eventually, ISIS wants to create a world empire. Their intentions right now is to create an Islamic state.
And the red up there on the picture is the territory ISIS currently controls.
Thank you, Gabby.
What countries don't support ISIS? Many countries are trying to take ISIS down. These countries include the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Russia, and several Arabic countries. The mass destruction ISIS has caused led to the countries fighting back. The U.S. has launched around 9,000 airstrikes back. ISIS is losing money because of these countries as well. The group makes most of their money from illegal oil sales, selling electricity and water, and taxing people who live in their territory.
Refugee crisis. Many Iraqi and Syrian civilians are fleeing from the Middle East to refugee camps due to the fighting. Approximately 700 to 1,000 people arrive at refugee camps run by the United Nations daily from, I think it's pronounced Mosul,
Mosul,
a city in northern Iraq. The camps are located around 20 kilometers east of Mosul. Or, how do you say it?
Mosul, you said it right.
And then this is the graph, and that's the number of refugees from March 2002 to August 2015, and you can see it's risen a lot.
What has the U.S. done so far? So far, the U.S. has been fighting wise. We have a military base set in a corner of an international airport in Iraq. In addition, they have launched about 9,000 airstrikes against ISIS. There are also special operators, CIA agents, and private military contractors who interrogate, hunt, and even kill ISIS. As far as the refugee crisis, the U.S. has provided $6.5 billion since it started in 2012. This money aids refugees within Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and Egypt.
And also the money that the United Nations, not the United Nations, the United States has donated, which is the $6.5 billion. It goes towards healthcare, sanitary, taxes, stuff like that. Yeah, education, sanitation, water, nutrition, and legal assistance and protection.
Damage. The first 8 months that Trump was in office, there was 1,196 incidents in which about 4,500 civilians died. While Obama was in office, which was 28 months, there was only 855 incidents in which 3,500 civilians were killed. And then these graphs is like, this one is like how many strikes per month in Iraq and Syria. And over here it shows like how many casualties there were when Trump was in.
Can you explain those to us? Like, go up and start to explain each graph to us?
Like this one?
All of them.
So the orange is Syria and the blue is Iraq. And you can see that at first, I think like mostly Iraq, and then it gets like a lot in Syria too. And
That's
these
the
are all
number
like,
of strikes.
yeah,
Air
that
strikes.
US is launched against them.
And then the next graph, this shows the number of casualties, which is the y-axis, everybody, and the number, and the number of
I don't
months.
actually know what that is.
And that's the x-axis, and then the red line is
How much?
when Trump was in, Trump's administration, and then the blue line was Obama's administration. And as you can see, Trump has, there have been more casualties under Trump's administration than there have been Obama's, and Obama was more.
Like he had more time.
What's the difference between the number of casualties versus civilians killed?
Casualties means like disasters. It could also mean deaths too, but casualties kind of means.
And
like,
it also includes like if there's any troops dying. And then civilians are like mainly people that aren't really involved in the war. It's pretty much like citizens
and
that are just.
that's the
around.
civilians. And as you can see, more civilians have died too under Trump's administration than Obama's under a shorter period of time. Okay, Republicans versus Democrats. Most Republicans are looking to put an end to ISIS now. Democrats, on the other hand, want to be more patient with the group. And back to the graphs to prove the point. As you can see, Trump has had more airstrikes, so he's a little less patient with ISIS than Obama was. Yeah. And then we have a video. Picture.
It seems that hardly a day goes by in which the Islamic State, also known as ISIS or ISIL, doesn't appear in a newspaper or on a TV news screen. And the news is always bad. Hideous death and wanton destruction of a type rarely seen in modern history. So what is the Islamic State? Where did it come from? What does it want? And why? Let's try to answer these questions in turn. First, ISIS is the illegitimate child of Saddam Hussein's regime and Al-Qaeda. Saddam's former military and intelligence officers hold many of ISIS's most senior positions and have overseen the group's rise to prominence. In 2002 and early 2003, some Al-Qaeda members relocated from Afghanistan to Iraq, where they prepared to fight the Americans, who toppled Saddam Hussein's regime in March 2003. These jihadists became known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq when their leader, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, swore his allegiance to Osama bin Laden in 2004. Zarqawi, a murderous psychopath, was finally killed by U.S. and Iraqi forces in June 2006. Following his death, Al-Qaeda in Iraq was rebranded as the Islamic State of Iraq. In 2010, a new leader took control of the group, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Taking advantage of the power vacuum left by the complete U.S. withdrawal from Iraq in 2011 and the Syrian civil war that began that same year, Baghdadi and his lieutenants greatly expanded the size and scope of the organization. At first, Baghdadi was loyal to al-Qaeda senior leadership, but in 2013 he defied orders from his superiors and declared that his group was now the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or Levant, known by its acronyms ISIS and ISIL. It's worth noting that ISIS continues to market Osama bin Laden's endorsement of them to this day. What does ISIS want and why? ISIS is attempting to resurrect an empire similar to those that arose in Islam's early history. These empires were referred to as caliphates and led by a caliph, the Muslims' chief ruler, also known as the Emir of the Faithful. This is, in fact, how Baghdadi's followers now refer to him. ISIS relies on a rich Islamic mythology with citations from Islamic texts to justify its actions and portray itself as the true heirs of Muhammad. Their propaganda videos use Islam's early history to frame their actions as part of an ongoing conflict with the Crusaders. ISIS's leaders want their followers to believe they are fighting as part of the same religious war. When ISIS's Libyan branch executed 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians in 2015, ISIS advertised the slayings in a video titled, "A Message Signed with Blood to the Nation of the Cross." The Nation of the Cross, of course, meaning Christians. That's why on Libya's Mediterranean shores, the lead executioner of the Egyptian Coptic Christians pointed his knife in the direction of Italy and promised to conquer Rome, the symbolic seat of Christendom. Despite seeking to spark an interfaith war, however, most of ISIS's victims are Muslims, especially Shiite Muslims for whom ISIS, which is Sunni Muslim, harbors a special animosity. ISIS claims that any Muslim who does not swear bay'ah, an oath of allegiance, to Baghdadi is an infidel or an apostate. Even ISIS's rival jihadists and Al-Qaeda are considered apostates because they refuse to genuflect to Baghdadi. In November 2014, Baghdadi announced that his caliphate had expanded into several areas outside of Iraq and Syria. Baghdadi's people set up provinces everywhere from West and North Africa to the Arabian Peninsula to South Asia. ISIS argues that Muslims owe these provinces their loyalty. Most of these provinces control little territory, but they have become prolific killers. Just over 1 year after Baghdadi's announcement, the Islamic State's provinces had already engaged in hundreds of terrorist attacks. On October 31st, 2015, for example, the Islamic State's province in Sinai brought down a Russian airliner, killing all 224 people on board. In sum, ISIS is attempting to become a permanent totalitarian state, inspired by the caliphates of Islam's first decades. From this base, they will spread their ideology to the rest of the world. Anyone who stands in the way is marked for death. But ISIS's caliphate claim rests on its ability to control territory. This is both its strength and Achilles' heel. Should it lose significant ground in Iraq and Syria, its caliphate claim will become tenuous, severely damaging its legitimacy in the eyes of many Muslims. How this might happen is a key question for the United States, Europe, Asia, and many in the Arab world. But this much we know: it will take much more than airstrikes. I'm Tom Jocelyn of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies for PragerU.